while you're all coming in, and before we get started, as ever with our webinars, I will be keeping an eye on, thank you very much. Oh, London. Yes, thanks, Siva. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat, as will the events team. And we'll see if there are an abundance of questions that are coming in as we're in mid-flow. We'll take them as we go. Otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end as usual. So I'll try and multitask and make sure that I'm keeping an eye on that while we're answering the questions as well. And feel free, obviously, you have your thoughts. I know you will. I know questions that you have for what we have together, joined together is a great webinar panel. Okay, let's see. Anything that we don't get to answer, we usually do a podcast dive into fintech at the end of our webinars, where if we don't get to answer your questions, we'll either reply to them through the podcast or by email afterwards. So that's our usual. And everything, as you all probably know, because you're here with us, you can always find all the coordinates for any of our webinars, any of our podcasts on the websites, be they on the digital center or on the, as I call it, the mothership of LIBF as well. Right. Okay. Hi, well, Vietnam. Gosh, we really have gone everywhere, haven't we? Wonderful. Donald, thank you very much, Donald. Okay, right. Well, for me, this is one of those topics that is close to my heart. I worked, of course, we're working in education, but also I worked in recruitment for a long time. And the title of our session today is Jobs of the Future in Finance, Cyborgs, Coding, and Compliance. And we all know, whatever part of financial services we work in, that compliance will always get a look in, because that's the thing we spend a ton of money on because we have to do. So sometimes we think there'll always be a job there, although automation is creeping in. Now, we're saying this now, and of course, the last year has made us acutely aware of technology in our lives. Lovely to have you in there, Christina from Cyprus. But it's been building up over the last few years, hasn't it? We've been talking about predominantly around AI and AI taking jobs out of financial services. And so that's always been the talk in the background. But the other thing that we've learned over this last 18 months is that we're all craving a human touch to some extent or another. So we've gone full on with technology in banking and in financial services, and obviously in fintech, bringing it to the fore. But now I think we can step back and think, well, is there a blend? Is it all about the tech? Is there some kind of blending of the two sides? I don't want to call them soft skills because they're not soft skills, but for the purpose of not having another name, someone in the chat give me another suggestion for soft skills, i.e. things that are not tech. We'll see how we work with them as we go forward into the future. Before we start, we have a poll, and I think Liam will help me with the poll because we want to get your views a little bit as well. So thank you very much, obviously in the US, which of the following skills, knowledge do you think will be the most important for financial services professionals in 5 years' time? Soft skills or tech skills or industry product knowledge? It's like being at the races for me. They're going neck and neck, aren't they? Technical skills and industry knowledge are going neck and neck, aren't they? Soft skills are coming down. Interpersonal skills, thank you, Gerald, as well. Yeah. So we're kind of split, really, between tech skills, financial services, industry, product, and knowledge, and what we're calling for the moment soft skills are back a little bit back, which I find very interesting. If we have time, we're going to look and do this again at the end as well. Okay. Okay, so we can share the results and I can come out of the polling. All right, maybe not. Okay, right. Okay, so obviously I'm not here by myself and LIBF is not here by itself. So before we get stuck into the conversation, I would ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Ez, do you want to start?
Hi, everyone. Sure. So I'm Ez, or Ez Britton. I'm a founding member, CTO in residence and principal for ImpactX Capital, which is the £100 million venture capital fund supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs across the UK and Europe and beyond. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Code Untapped, which is a digital skills accelerator. We concentrate on showcasing, upskilling and placing diverse technology talent through our workshops, innovation labs, and various organizations that we work alongside. In a former life, I actually started off as a technologist. So I was a coder in the investment banking tech space for over 10 years. Firstly, Lehman Brothers in credit derivatives, and then Credit Suisse in equity derivatives. So fintech from before we used to call it fintech. I left the banking space and was the co-founder and CTO of the multi-award winning startup Neighbor. We were a salary deducted lending organization that provided access to finance to UK based employees. We went from 0 employees to over 100. We lent over 170 million pounds to UK based employees, and we were famously one of Goldman Sachs's largest or record investments in the UK at the time. I think they put over 100 million through us. So we raised over 200 million pounds as a company. So I've been involved in technology, I've been involved in investing, I'm involved in teaching, and I have a permanent eye on the future and what does that look like, in particular from a skills, from whether it's what can I do in a role or what skills do I need to build a startup. So fascinating talk, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We've had one message in the chat about moving closer to the microphones. I don't know if it was both of us or everyone, so we'll do our best. Just let us know. Roisin.
Hi there, I'm Roisin Levine. I'm head of banks at a fintech called Flux, and Flux is an API for receipt data. So if you have a Barclays, Monzo or Starling account, you can try us out. We deliver a digital receipt in seconds. So if you go pay, what we're really doing is taking SKU level data from merchants, transaction data of banks, matching that in real time, providing back the digital receipt. And I head up the bank partnerships there. So really I spearhead kind of all our account management and kind of new business development for banks. Prior to that, I was actually head of partnerships at a business finance brokerage called Funding Options. And then before that, I was actually heading up partnerships for a company called USwitch, which is now part of the more famous kind of tech unicorn Zoopla. And that was acquired while I was working there. And then actually prior to that, my first real job was actually working in a recruitment company. So not at all tech, really a kind of more kind of, I guess, transactional sales role that I then kind of found my way into tech after. So that's kind of my CV in completion.
Thank you. Ant?
Hi, I'm Ant Mazen. I'm the Future Skills Lead for Lloyds Banking Group. We're the largest retail and commercial bank in the UK. We employ around 65,000 people, and I've been here for about 10 years now. And prior to that, I was a management consultant at Accenture for about 10 years. And pre that, I was at university. So that's my CV at a very headline level. In addition to my work at Lloyds, I'm also part of the Financial Services Skills Commission, which is a UK-based financial services skills commission. And I also sit on the World Economic Forum's Financial Services Skills Forum as well. So a topic that's very, very close to my heart.
Thank you very much, indeed. And Nadeem.
Hi everyone, my name is Nadeem Chowdhury. I head up the Careers and Employability Division at the London Institute of Banking and Finance. I'm also a lecturer on our undergraduate banking and finance degree programs. I've been working in the sector careers support for the last nearly 20 years. And I also sit on the board, the Learning and Development Board for the ICAEW. And we're having very similar discussions at the moment about skills development in the accountancy industry. So very happy to talk today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got people again just dialing into the chat for all of us. You know what I like this? So there's this mix, and like Roisin, I started out in some of my work in recruitment and then moved into some tech firms, as well as some of the accelerators. So it's a blend, and actually what I'm feeling from all of us is that you can shift in and out, but we fall into different camps when it comes to joining the financial services workforce. We're either newbies, right? And we've just graduated, or we've just come out of school, or we're just our first jobs, or we're then moving along our careers. And then really actually some of us are returners and relearners. So reskilling and upskilling and changing those skills. And I think for me, these groups, two different groups, and I'll get your thoughts on it. Do we need to look at the skills differently from a tech perspective, from an other skills? I gotta get past soft skills for these two sets of groups, and how we're gonna discuss, I suppose, how difficult it has been for that latter group really during this whole period of uncertainty to upskill, reskill, and what skills do we need to stay if we want to stay in financial services as well. So that's my split on that, as it were. And Ant, why don't you start, because you're looking at future skills, as it were, but you're looking from the incumbent perspective, and you're presumably seeing both ends of the spectrum coming into the bank.
Yeah, yeah, massive experience. I mean, our core banking system, right, to bring this to life, was introduced in the 70s, which is, you know, before the kind of concept of fintech, many decades before the concept of fintech even bubbled up. And we still have people who are there to support and maintain that platform. So even within the tech skills space, there's huge breadth, because you've got the new age tech skills, but you've also got the more traditional tech skills that we can't afford to lose, because those systems still need to be kept upright for us to function as an organization. But we set out on a journey sort of 4 years ago to work out what the skills we're going to need for the future. And we identified 10, which, you know, primarily go unchanged, actually. Even now we're looking at it again. And they do sit kind of squarely in sort of the tech skill space. So we focus on innovation, agile change and design, which is where you have all the human-centered design work and any agile change project management work bundled into that. Data and analytics, engineering, cybersecurity, and AI. And obviously, as part of AI, applied sciences, robotics, automation, all of that can kind of be brought into that. So we absolutely had the tech skills in there, and they made up half of the skills that we were looking for. But alongside that, and when I was talking to colleagues in Lloyds about it, I was saying it is not in with the new, out with the old, because again, what we dialed up was customer service and relationship management as two distinct skill sets. We couldn't afford to lose those, but it was, you know, the M&S adverts. It's a different style of relationship management. So if M&S did relationship management, this is how we would do it, because it's tech-enabled relationship management, where if you have a client with an API built and direct access to your systems, they rock up at a conversation with you so much more informed than they would have been before. And all of a sudden you have a much broader conversation that might not just be about lending. It is all of a sudden across the breadth of products to meet a broader range of needs. And that is tech enabled, because they have this information at their fingertips. And it's not just us having that information, they have it. So how do you equip RMs to be brilliant at building rapport, very empathetic, have all of the soft skills we require, but how do you integrate data and insight and technology into all of that? So that's the challenge that we're facing. And just to kind of complete our 10 skills, it's RM and customer service. In addition, we have risk, but less kind of the credit risk, more for us, day-to-day operational risk and conduct risk. And it won't be a surprise with big, large banks that conduct risk is very prominent, but do people actually know what that means in practice, and do they have the skills to apply it? And last but by no means least, personal excellence skills. And if ever we've had a year for how you need to have great personal excellence skills, how do you manage a hybrid workforce? Working in lots of different locations. And whilst, you know, a lot of us thinking about home working, we've had loads of people who've still been working in branches. We've had 95% of our branches open throughout the pandemic and going into work each day. But as a manager, how do you work from home and manage people who are in the office and outside of the office? And also multi-generational workforces as well. We've got 5 generations in the workforce now. How hard is that to deal with, particularly if you're a graduate coming straight out of college and you have to manage a 60-something as well as a peer, and everything in between. So focusing on those personal excellence skills. And last but by no means least, leadership skills. For us have just been vital over the past few years. How do you lead people through change, and change that is happening at a pace that we've just never seen before, and it will continue to grow. And there are organizations like Gartner that have predicted that we will expect to see, if you feel tired at the moment, 4 times the volume of change we're currently experiencing in only 3 years' time. So that's massive. So that's kind of our perspective on skills, and that's certainly what we're talking about. And the unique challenge that we have is, yes, we operate across multiple challenges, which, you know, some of the fintechs don't, but also we've got a workforce of 65,000 that we're not going to replace overnight, nor would we want to. We need to give them the opportunity to build these skills whilst working. And actually, there's one thing I would say to people who aren't working on this call: make the most of that time, because there's stacks of great resources out there. Learn those skills, because boy, when you start working, is it challenging to fit in the day job and also reskilling at the same time. So a very long-winded answer there, Helen, but hopefully gives you a flavour of the breadth of the challenge that we're facing as an incumbent.
And actually, as you said, and of course, it was hard for everyone to motivate themselves after the second lockdown, let's say. After the first one, I think we were all kind of enthused and we were going to make the best use of the time. But as you say, this whole period of uncertainty, and we can't really ignore the fact that financial services has taken a very large hit in terms of roles that have been, people have been made redundant globally, and then new roles have been created at the same time. But there has been a very uneasy feeling Can I just ask before we start to speak to other parts of our panel? We have these, you've got this multi-generational group. We've got the skills, the hard skills, and the other skills that you've set aside. How does that play out in reality? So if I'm somebody that's just left school, or I'm somebody that's come to someone in my team and said, I want to change jobs, I want to move into this other side, but I don't have these skills, right? How do I get those skills? What's some of the reality of that at Lloyds? What does that look like in action?
Oh, there are so many themes here. So one thing, you have people who are kind of getting carried away and thinking they need to be the next data scientist. And we're saying to them, no, you don't really, you just need to be good with data. So there are some people who are thinking they need to kind of leapfrog, and they genuinely don't actually, just kind of fall in love with data, fall in love with being curious and asking the right questions of data, and focus less on data production and more on insight and analytics. And then if you want to take it further, then by all means explore big data and data science, but just kind of start with kind of small steps and see where your journey takes you. So just kind of be curious. So we have those types of conversations. The others are a lot of people saying, well, what skills? You keep talking about skills of the future. So off the back of those 10 skills that I talked about, we launched strategic learning hubs, is what we called them. And we made them available to all colleagues. And we said to them, look, we can't tell you what all of the jobs of the future are going to look like. But what we can say is we've heard a lot about these skills. And we've gone out, we've curated the best learning we have internally and also from external learning providers, things like for us, LinkedIn, or Percipio that used to be Skillsoft, and Pluralsight will be onboarded later on this year for our engineers. And we've said, this is some of the best training for foundation, intermediate and advanced. Go have a play. And those hubs are available to all of our colleagues. And we've said, please go and have a look and see what you're interested in. And then separate to that, there are certain populations where we said, you know what, we need to push learning at you. We need to take you through a journey because we need you to be as a payments expert at an advanced level when you're currently at a foundation level. So we created a series of 1920 accelerated development programs for certain populations, and we pushed those out and said, please work your way through those because we need you to kind of get through those over a period of time. So we tried to follow up on here are the skills with actually this is how you go about building those skills.
Right.
But in addition, Helene, we've revamped our graduate program. So you know, every division used to feel it had to have a graduate program, but we said, actually, no, let's target our graduate efforts because it's expensive on those skills that we absolutely need. So we've now stood up a data scientist graduate program, a software engineering graduate program, and they will work across divisions in those specific fields. And similarly with apprenticeships, we've really increased our interest in apprenticeships across all aspects of our group, and we'll continue to push them, not only at the junior level, level 3, level 4, but increasingly the senior level of apprenticeships, 5, 6, 7. And we'll be launching more of those through this year.
Okay.
So continue to reach out as well.
Thank you, because actually someone in the channel asked that where they can find the resources, and now that person knows. I'm going to assume that you're from Lloyds, but I won't look, she says, for GDPR purposes. Ez, I would like to carry on something that Ant started talking about in terms of skills, and we talked about the need for certain skills that are tech skills. Now, obviously, you started in that space as a professional, but you've come full circle now in the sense that you set up Code Untapped for a reason. You must have thought there was a reason there were a group of people that were not being educated, and not also, let's face it, you can learn the skills, but if there's not a job or a job possibility somewhere on the other side, you kind of sit there and go, what am I doing? And what's my focus? What moved you so much to the point? And of course, Ant, we know that you'll be onboarding Code Untapped, and also you're obviously working with LIBF. She says, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. What moved you to get to the point where you actually took action yourself to create a channel for these skills to be adopted?
Well, it's a really good one. Firstly, when I look at technology, I look at technology companies as well, and I think about where is the value being created today, and I think about who are the top 4 largest companies by market cap value today, and they're all technology businesses. You've got the FANGs, you've got your Facebooks, your Amazons, your Googles, your Netflixes, your Teslas. Right? These are all tech businesses, Microsoft, Apple. And the core skill sets they require are coding, right? It's all about programming. And I look at my own career and I think about what being a programmer has enabled me to do. And you know, as you've touched on, you know, I started off as a Java developer. I then ended up founding my own company. And now I both have an organization that helps upskill others, and I invest in other startups. And that all started with me doing a computer science degree or even a computing A-level, right? But not everyone. The interesting thing is, I went to a school where the 5A pass grade was 14%, 1-4. There was not a teacher in my school who could have predicted my pathway at all. And in fact, I didn't start in it thinking I'm going to become an investor. I started learning to program for the same reason that a lot of people learn to program, which was video games, right? And I started by playing Double Dragon in the arcades when I was going to swimming when I was about 8 years old. And that's what set me on this
He's
journey.
lost me. He's lost me.
You know, it's one of those funny things, lights flash around on the screen and, you know, you beat things up. It's what it is. But I look at that and I think about what it did for me. And one of the things I'd often do post Neighbor was I'd be on the speaking circuit talking about the founder's journey, being a diverse founder, building a startup, and you know the challenges there, but also the glass ceilings have never been thinner. You know, anyone can go and start a company tomorrow, and if you've got those coding skills, you can write an app, you can get it launched in the Play Store or the App Store. You can host it globally on GCP, Azure, or AWS. And within 5 years, you get bought by Google or Facebook for £4 billion, right? Now, don't get me wrong, just because it's possible doesn't mean it's likely, but you can have a go. And yet I'd be out there speaking about this. And the only people who looked like me were serving drinks in canapes. And at that point, I had to question, why is this the case when there's never been more free resource out there to enable you to learn these skills? There's never been more information. Everyone has in the palm of their hand a device that gives them access to the entire repository of human knowledge, the entire repository. And yet we're still not seeing people from underrepresented backgrounds breaking into these industries. Why is that? And there's two issues here. One is the pathways that they select at age 10, 11, when you have to start that conveyor belt with your GCSEs. But the other is, who are the gatekeepers as you're going through that journey? So Code Untapped is about trying to break down two of those barriers. It's about trying to help develop those skills in individuals, but it's also about helping businesses overcome some of those barriers that they've erected, whether that's on purpose or whether by accident. And for the most part, I claim it is by accident, right? Hiring is a difficult thing to do, as we all know. It's hard to find the right people and it's a risk. So what do you look for? You look for, well, who's good? And the first thing you think about is, well, I like to think that I'm good. And what do I look like? And I don't mean you look in a mirror and see your reflection. I mean, you look at your CV, you look at the jobs that you've done, the roles that you've had, the technologies that you've worked with, the titles that you've had, the education that you've had. And in a homogeneous society, most of those people will have similar backgrounds to you. And that reinforces this whole pattern of behavior that we see and makes it harder for people to break in. And then at the same time, it's hard for people to elevate because they start to see those barriers, so they self-select out. People like me. I was a developer for 5 years, chose to become a contractor because I couldn't see myself stepping up through those ladders. Then after 5 years as a contractor, I stepped out, founded my own company because I still couldn't see myself continuing to progress within that organization. And so what then happens, a dearth of people like me at those higher levels, trying to hire people like me into these organizations. So the circle is endless, right? So you need other organizations that are positioned to help either both train and provide opportunities for these people. And that's also why I'm with ImpactX, because that company is looking at those who don't fit the mold of your traditional route, but are struggling to build those companies and find those sources of funding that they require. Now, we're not a bootstrap fund, we're a growth VC fund, but we're there for that step of the journey, and I have a very wide network of individuals who I can connect people up with if needed. So long story short, I got into this, I started Code Untapped primarily to help give people from diverse backgrounds an opportunity that I felt wasn't made explicit enough for them. They couldn't see the journey, they didn't know where to start on it, and if they were lost. So from Code Untapped, I always say we act more as a guiding light and a shining star, more than anything else. Yes, there's coaching. Yes, there's upskilling, but really we're there to say, look, the route is possible. Here's how we did it, and here's how we can help you do it. And actually something that we're doing later on this year, we're running an event in partnership with Google, where we're going to be talking specifically about the engineer's journey into Google and the number of attempts it typically takes to get into that kind of organization. Because another issue we see with people from our backgrounds is that they think they've only got one shot. And for the most part, that's true. So what they think is, well, I've only got one go at this, so I won't do it. Or I'll wait until later. And I know this myself. After 10 years at Lehman, in banking, I was being asked to go for an interview at Google by an internal recruiter at Google. And I said, no. I said, no way. They're not going to hire me. Not a chance, right? And yet off I've gone and built a 200 million pound company. I'm part of a 100 million pound fund. I'm a NED, I'm an advisor. And I was saying Google wouldn't hire me, right? And now I'm doing a workshop sponsored by Google, right?
Yeah.
And this is the challenge. And this is what people don't see, the number of roadblocks to people from diverse backgrounds when it comes to upskilling and technology. Don't get me wrong, these do apply to everyone as well. Other people from other backgrounds have issues too, but there is a specific set of hurdles that people from diverse backgrounds suffer when it comes to participating and growing into these organizations.
Thank you. And actually, it's good for us to also remember, because we're talking about just, what are the skills? What do I have to do? What should I be trying to build up in my skill bank? But there are other forces at play. And sometimes we see it from the culture that we're from. Sometimes we see it in the age bracket that we're in. Sometimes we'll see it from the geography that we're from, where people have a certain perception about us. And potentially you have to be, 3 times as good just to be in the same place as other people. I'm going to look at some of the things in the chat as we go along, because there was a question around that there's a comment around the fact that young people create avatars and other people who are very creative create things that are technical. Yes. There was a question about disintermediation from the blockchain exciting or scaring us, so we'll come back to that. There was also a question about reskilling and upskilling people who are further along in their career. And Nadeem, I want to turn to you at this point also, because in your role in employability and in careers that we have at LIBF, and of course we're there helping people to get some of the skills that they need, and we have lots of financial institutions in our customer base. I'm going to guess that everything that has been said so far, you're seeing, you're facing, you're encountering. We start with schools children and we go all the way through. I know people that trained with us in the 70s and are retraining with us now, because we have been around for 141 years, right? So what's your experience, and what are we doing in an active way to support people as they go through this journey?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Helene. I think a bit of context on the higher education side is important here. I've been working in the sector for about nearly coming up to 20 years. And I must say, sometimes I feel like it's Groundhog Day. We talk about skills all the time. Employers are always telling universities that graduates don't have the right skills when they enter the industry. Right now, the context is really important in higher education. So some of the policy debates in government around skills often drive what's going on in universities. From a personal perspective, I would say that in the last few years, there's been a real shift in what, say, society expects from universities. We're long past the day where university was seen as a rite of passage, but now students, parents, their carers are really seeing it as a form of investment. So the regulatory body called the OFS, the Office of Students, which governs us, calls this value for money. So I'd just like everyone to think about this, what value do students get when they go to university? And the skills bit becomes even more important. I would say from a careers perspective, from a student's perspective, getting secure and stable employment, which is future-proof. And in terms of skills, what we're really seeing from the Office of Students and the sector in general, they want universities to be able to provide qualifications and opportunities. So there's a lot of funding at the moment that we're seeing on conversion courses, for example, in data science and artificial intelligence. There's a real focus on regional development. And I think that's going to all take place even further after the pandemic finishes, much more investment in local communities and education. Similar to what Ez was saying, we're seeing a focus on providing support for underrepresented groups and giving them access to higher education. And obviously, from what Ant is saying as well, there's a big drive within the apprenticeship space, and we're really at the forefront of this with our financial services apprenticeships qualifications. Another thing that I've seen at the moment is support by the OFS in really providing funding for the Institute of Coding. So bringing together government, educational institutions, and I think they've got over 150 courses at the moment, and over 800,000 students have taken one of their qualifications. From our perspective, within the degree programs, we've recently done a big audit of our skills, and we've consulted the banks and other institutions. And I'm going to focus on this soft skills bit. We've looked at things such as cultural awareness, having cross-disciplinary abilities, managing diverse and agile teams, having a growth mindset, emotional intelligence, ethical motivation. So these are the things which are very much embedded within our degree programs in terms of skills. Now, how do we support, like Helen, you said we've been around for 140 years, starting all the way from providing qualifications in schools to providing qualifications within the banking space, within trade finance, within the regulated advisory space. But the three things that I've noticed here, and I'm sure you'd know this better than anyone else, are three areas that we're really focusing on, which is linked to the skills space, is around developing qualifications within the fintech space, so our digital banking sector, which you and Chris lead, the Centre for Sustainable Finance, and our most newest centre focusing around risk governance and regulation. So I'm sure all of you would agree that with the advancement of technology, the role of governance and regulation is never too far away. At LIBF, we are definitely identified as this as an area of importance to us. So I can definitely see the link from what Ant and Ez have been saying.
I muted myself. So, and actually, and you mentioned, this is something to talk about. So we see it in fintech clearly, the sustainable finance. Sustainable finance isn't going anywhere fast, right? It's getting bigger and bigger now, and it's coming into the regulated environment. So I think what skills are associated with that, because I'm listening to you as well. I'm thinking, okay, the Institute of Coding has 150 courses. We've got the digital skills agenda from the government. We know that we're going to be spreading out to the Northern Powerhouse, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that all of you are from around the world and you have different things going on in your own countries. As we're speaking, I'm also starting to think, gosh, I'm a little bit overwhelmed now. Do I go down the coding route for sustainable finance and hook up with a fintech or an incumbent bank? I'm watching, as there's a question about cyborgs in here, which I think that's a question for over drinks, but we'll come back to the questions. But also, there's a lot of information in there that we're going to have to, how do people sift through all that and say, and you talk about having tracks and journeys that you have, at Lloyds, as you've got a specific take on the learning journey and pathway. Roisin, I'm coming to you to talk about your journey and also about how you hire and what you're doing in terms of hiring, and it's for your team and for Flux. One thing that just strikes me, and maybe we can come to this when we talk about, our final thoughts, is how do I navigate, and what are like the two things that I should be looking if I'm doing a bit of a detox on my skill set, or I'm doing a review of me now and where I want to be in 5 years. So I'll come back to that. I just want to touch with Roisin first. Roisin, I think, your journey, if in your career journey, if I know correctly from our conversations, you didn't set out to do this and then move into something like Flux, right? You mentioned earlier on that you were in recruitment, and as you've grown, I'm sure your teams grow, your responsibility grows. So the other side of that question is your hiring. But what was part of your journey was, when did you get some tech or feel you needed tech as you were moving through this journey, for example, from recruitment into the more fintech world? Was it something that you were conscious of and you said, oh, I'm going to have to do this or get this? Or does it actually matter? And people who are doing things like partnership and sales and customer support and all the things we know are vital, do we really need to be that techie?
It's an interesting question. So I kind of go back to this, like kind of when I was at university. And if I'm really honest with you, I did not have a clue what I was going to do. And I wouldn't say I was particularly well versed on what was out there. And that's partly maybe some of my background. So when I got to university and people started saying things about like the big four and magic circle firms, I was like, what? People want to be magicians? You know, it just wasn't part of it wasn't part of the lingo that like I'd been brought up with, you know. And so in understanding career routes, and I didn't have a family that were all kind of working professional services, was quite a kind of confusing concept. And I mention this because I think sometimes tech does this. We have a lot of jargon, and I think sometimes the barriers for entry can feel higher than they are. And the reality was, I went out of uni, I got a job ultimately doing a sales job in recruitment. And what I could see emerge because of the recruitment firm I was working with in the sector was tech boom in London. And so there was all these engineers being placed in these companies that were just like growing like mad. And I thought, wow, that's obviously a very good sector. Maybe that's a sector I could work in. Maybe that'd be a good sector to work in. I didn't have the plan or set out to know that. And I'm sure there are certain students right now at university who may not have the awareness of quite how big a sector tech may be and quite how vital it could be to kind of start thinking about the foot in that door. And so I was very lucky, and I would say I was totally fortunate in that I was actually used, which was a client that I was servicing. And then I eventually said like, hey, could I work for you? Do you think these skills are applicable? And ultimately my skills were sales skills. And they said, you know what? Yeah, they probably are. I didn't know the first thing of what API was. I didn't really talk about product, product, what the hell is that? Like, I was like, I just, I sell a service or whatever. But I learned those things. And the fact is, I don't think that the barrier was that large. I think that ultimately a lot of skills are transferable, but sometimes the way we talk about things can feel like a larger barrier. So my journey was one that I went into that. I still applied those kind of sales skills, but I started to learn about things. I started to work with product managers. I started to work with engineers. I started to understand their land. And then I kind of stayed in tech from there onwards. But I guess when I come to hiring, I try and have that open mind, because quite often we write these job specs and we say things like, would like fintech experience, or would like, to understand their way around API documentation when, they're a salesperson ultimately. And I think, do they really need that? Like, surely if they don't, like, if they can pick it up and they can have that willing, then maybe they don't. And some of it I find that I have to kind of challenge myself on it and the different approaches. It's really hard, but I guess my word of advice to anyone setting out is that if you have a kind of skill and a kind of thing that you own, whether that be marketing or sales, or if you are an engineer, then great. But like, ultimately it can be transferred. And I think that you're not stuck to one sector. You should have an open mind about where that job role is evolving to. We have suddenly jobs everywhere popping up, product marketing managers. When I was first setting out into my kind of job search, everything was just marketing manager. You didn't have a product marketing manager. That role's kind of been an evolution. And so there are certain things that kind of niche down. But you just have to have an awareness and open-mindedness about that. But you should still, I believe, try to hone down on one particular thing you're quite good at. And then ultimately the sector experience, I'm not sure if I believe this whole idea of like kind of, you're set out for tech or you're set out for this. I think things are much more transferable, and I wish companies thought a bit more like that, to be quite honest. I think bigger companies are better at it than smaller ones. In fact, I think that startups can actually be quite niche in their thinking, mostly because they don't have the resources to train people. And I think that can be a barrier. So yeah.
Yeah, and you're saying this reminds me of someone I was talking to hiring data scientists at one of the large Dutch banks, and they said they don't just hire data scientists anymore. So it's hard enough to get a job anyway, but now you actually have had to either work for a startup or done something on the commercial side, because you're crafting the product for the end user. And if you're separated so far from them because you're just the data scientist, and I don't mean just the data scientist, you know what I mean? You're not able to understand in a human way, back to what we've been speaking about, the end user. And we now know that that's not acceptable. So if you are the data scientist, that job has just got much more difficult to get unless you have these other surrounding quote unquote softer or more commercial experiences. And actually, again, I'm listening to you because clearly I didn't go down the tech route, but have more functional skills. And I feel more buoyed to be able to go study something, as maybe, as you would point out, on my own, that might be some technical skills. You'll all laugh, but I can remember doing this for Excel spreadsheets, because 100 years ago when Excel was launched, someone said to me, oh, your skills are not as good as mine as they should be. And rather than just giving up, I went to an adult education center where they gently coached you, through the whole Excel spreadsheet thing. Who knew it was going to be such a big thing when I went and did that? But I had to go to a safe place for me. where I felt comfortable. And I think you're right. Sometimes the pressure's on to get the job. There's not enough money in a fintech for them to have that much fat or have that much leeway. In a larger organization, hopefully you have more availability of the training spectrum and more of an allowance for people to get new skills. We're obviously doing them and seeing them at LIBF, and as you're obviously teaching them as well. So, and again, and some Jacob and I totally agree that tech leaders should emphasize the skills that can be taught, and you can switch into tech later in your career. And the other side of this for me is that people are working longer. We're living longer, we're working longer. So where we might have had a cutoff in people in terms of reskilling, upskilling in their career, can we do that anymore? Or we actually have to now say lifelong learning means lifelong learning. And I'd like people's opinions on mixed teams, as in mixed ages, mixed cross-functional as well in skill sharing. What do we think about that? Anyone?
So I think you're kind of alluding to cross-functional teams there, right?
Yeah, and now they're mentors and advocates as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in cross-functional teams in the traditional Scrum sense, whereby you have people with different skill sets who can own a project from cradle to grave, right? And I think this is massive because what it does is it gives people a lot more motivation to deliver on their projects. And it's quite strange. Back in the day when I started in banking, you didn't have front-end dev, back-end dev. You just had developers, and we just did everything. You know, you were given a project and you ran it and you did it yourself. You planned it, you designed it, you coded it, you tested it, you deployed it, and then you unfortunately had to support it as well. Whereas now, you know, we try to build these cross-functional teams that can support that. And I think it leans into having far broader skill sets as well. You have your strength, but you can adapt and learn and gain better skills from other people. And I think there's a really important point that someone touched on about the value of banks and large organizations in this, is that there is a lot more scope to learn and to learn within that organization. Whereas in a fintech, you're right, they don't have the fat. They need you to be able to just pick it up. You can pick up as much as you like in a fintech, but you're not going to get much support in doing it, right? That's kind of the way it is.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know, I remember when I was at Lehman Brothers, I started off as a Java developer, and I had to fly over to New York for 2 weeks to work on this front-end project, which was all written in .NET. And I told my boss at the time, look, Bhupesh, I don't know .NET, I only know Java. And he was like, so learn it. And that was the end of the conversation.
Actually, and let me ask you a question on your point as well. You said Java, right? And then .NET and other things. In 5 years' time, with all the low code, no code that's coming out, am I going to need a Java developer anymore?
Right. So this is a really good one. Low code, no code is really valuable because it enables people to get moving and to start projects and to launch businesses, but you will always need coders. It's like spreadsheets technically remove the need for programmers until you realize it doesn't scale and that you need to replace it with an actual team and a system that does all the other things that you need to do. So I absolutely don't believe that low code, no code will replace it. But I think if you're in the finance space and you want to learn a technology skill, something you have to bear in mind is that technology skills, coding, it's like learning another language. Once you've learned one, you can learn another one. And whilst there are nuances, there are differences, different languages are better placed in different environments or for different challenges and problems. There's not that much of a difference between them unless you're going through something that is fundamentally different, like parallel programming focus versus object-oriented sequential programming, right? Then you have to be, okay, be a bit more specific. But typically what I say to people is if you want to be a developer and you want to learn something and you want to be able to apply it, learn JavaScript. It's the language of the web. It's free. It's open source. There are frameworks that you can just pick up and learn. Everyone uses it, and it will probably be the dominant language over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
If you're in the banking space and you want to learn some development skills to complement what you do, then I say learn Python. It's accessible, it's available, it's been, you know, worked to death by the likes of Google and the rest, and it is the language of choice if you're going to manipulate data. So those are really the two places where I start. Everything else hangs off of those.
Super. Okay, so there's some hope for that in 5 years we'll still be using that side of the human touch. I also want to ask a question. on, we have RPA, we have, we have all the things that happen with IVR and with voice. Do I need customer services anymore? One question. Other question, we've seen that we don't go to a branch, right, during the pandemic because we couldn't go to a branch. We see things like one banks and the hubs that are coming up. If I'm branch staff, have I got a future that looks the same, or am I going to have to evolve as well? So customer service, front-facing human interaction roles. With us in 5 years' time? Not with us in 5 years' time.
Oh, Helene, you're baiting me. I mean, we've talked about the disappearance of branches, right, for 20, 30 years, and they are still there, and people still love to use them. And actually, whilst there were fewer people understandably going into a branch, they still wanted to come because they wanted to engage with a human being. And certainly when it comes to financial products and big financial products, whether it's over the telephone or in a branch, you want to talk to somebody. And typically around things like a mortgage, you may well be able to do an hour, a 15-minute mortgage end to end without touching a human. The question is, do people actually want to do that? Because that's a huge amount of money that you're taking out and a huge amount of risk. And actually the joy about being able to engage with a person to talk it through, make sure you're appropriately protected off the back end of it, making sure you've thought about everything and you know all of the risks, is just critically important. So yes, simply put, there will be branches. Certainly from a Lloyds perspective, as we're looking into the future, we are modelling on continuing to have branches, but the branches will be different and they will be dealing with very different transactions to what they deal with at the moment. They might be more community hubs. And they might be more built around the complex transactions as opposed to simple. I mean, in effect, they will. So yes, is a simple answer to that.
Okay, very good. I went into a branch during the pandemic at Lloyds as well. Shane, if I'm moving into peer-to-peer payments and QR codes and smarter invoices and everything else, what's going to happen in terms of the payment space as well, right? So will we need companies in between that are doing things with our payments and with our receipts and everything else? If it suddenly becomes you and I can do this together, and that just goes straight into my accounting package, which goes straight into HMRC, which then makes me shake in my boots. No. So will we start to see some of the things that grew quite rapidly in fintech, for example, and in financial services, sort of as technology moves closer to us being with each other, being to be able to do it directly? Will they sort of, fade into the background a bit?
I guess like the pace of change is always slower than maybe people who work in kind of tech or the kind of future of kind of the space believe it to be. And the reality is that, for example, if you look at cash usage in many countries in Europe, it's still pretty high, and we think of card as like already like an old-fashioned technology, but you've still got cash here, and it's taking a while to kind of move on. And there are places in Asia where obviously mobile payments is kind of taken off in a totally different way to what we're seeing here. But I think that ultimately these things take a bit longer than everyone kind of sometimes would like to believe. Yes, peer-to-peer payments and payment space is changing rapidly. And, in the US, you have things like Venmo, and we have like ViPay and things like that. And they're gaining like big traction. But I think the reality is that the current way we're set up is it's going to take a while to change. The card schemes as they are, they have this huge dominance. That's not changing. Same as the banking landscape. We still have dominance of the largest banks, and people still rely on that. Open banking has definitely created a bit of a kind of interesting element to that. And for sure, there's some worries about competition from the card schemes. But I honestly, even though I work at the forefront of it, I still believe we'll see a world where, paper receipts will coexist with digital receipts for a hell of a long time. That's not going to change anytime soon overnight, but it'll be a slow shift. And we see that across most things, I think Germany only a couple of years ago, kind of card use went above kind of cash payment. That's now kind of keeps moving that direction. Similar, we believe digital receipts will one day be the ubiquitous thing, that everyone will no longer take a paper receipt. They'll just have a digital receipt to their bank app. It makes perfect sense, but it'll take a long while to get to that point. So this stuff will coexist, I think. And so I think great to have an eye on it, but I think it's not to forget that we still have this current network, and there's lots of people that rely on that network, and there's lots of reasons why people like to use the current tools and payment systems and things like that are available to us. So that's kind of my view.
And I think one thing you point out is we're talking, UK centric. Obviously, we're from all around the world, and our audience today is from all around the world. And cash use in LATAM, and as you say, in other parts of Asia, it's very different in terms of the way it's rolled out. The UK is very fortunate in that we we led the way on a lot of the things that were happening in the fintech space, and we're making the assumption that that is, you know, the way it is everywhere. But of course, it's a journey. Nadeem?
Yeah, I agree with what Ant and Roisin have said as well. And just from a personal perspective, look, you know, I'm a consumer of finance and banking. And if I want to transfer, say, some money, I can do it over my app. But if it's over a certain amount, I have to phone up my bank and still have to do that. So I think there's a trust element here from a consumer's perspective, and that would gauge how customer services work as well. And we've also experienced those bots, which don't really work very well. So until the technology actually works, all of us can spot a fake bot, right? You think you're speaking to someone, but when it doesn't work and when they don't understand you, you go off that very quickly and you want to speak to a human being. So I think we still haven't reached that stage of, you know, AI really being clever.
I'm gonna do a poll and say how many people actually have typed to the bot going, I don't want to speak to you, I want a human being. I have many times. Go away, bot, you're useless. Yes, so actually we have some people, thank you, in the chat talking about the fact that, you know, thank you, Keith, you've been there for a long time. I appreciate it. You definitely, yes, you want to be able to speak to a human being alongside the clever computers, and that branches and customer service and intermediary players in the chain accelerate to a different model is most likely. And I think that the reminder, as I said, for all of us, that this is a global conversation. We might be at a place, but everyone's getting to that place in their own right. And regulation, Shane, as you point out, open banking is starting to now spread everywhere, whether it's market driven or it's driven by a regulator. We're now seeing this become much more adopted in other parts of the world. That will change. So if we look at a 5-year window as opposed to a 10-year window, a lot of the things that we're doing now, a lot of the skills that we're blending, seem that they'll still be relevant if I listen to everybody on the panel. Let me just check the questions while you all think about resources, because as I said, it's slightly overwhelming to think, where am I going to go to find all these things?
I'm just going to say as well on your point about, you know, people still wanting to talk to a human. I used to see this quite a lot when I used to work at funding options. And we realized over a certain amount, kind of like the loan volume, people still wanted to chat to someone, even if they could just click and do those things instantly. And I'm sure it's the same for people taking out a mortgage. It's a big decision. And I think sometimes, although the automation, the technology is there, it still requires that kind of, you know, you want that one-on-one personal contact, because you know, this is people's lives at the end of the day, and finance is that important.
I personally think it becomes much more transparent now. Obviously, when I took my mortgage out in 1994 and did it all with a human being, and was missold some payment protection, I'm just saying, it was a completely different thing in terms of self-certifying, and also the journey with that relationship. Now, I had a great relationship and still have a great relationship with those with the bank, but I think technology has made the transparency, which is of course is what fintech set out to do, cheaper, easier, quicker, more transparent. We all know now more things that we did before, and it makes it much more cleaner cut. So to Ant's point and your point, when it gets to something larger, we still want a human touch. The other end of the spectrum, someone's asking about kids and teens, because of course we've seen the teen card rolling out everywhere around the world in terms of banking. They've grown up with that phone in the palm of their, you know, as an extension to their arm, and do everything online. So that's maybe not 5 years, that's maybe later. Will we then in a few years' time have to look at evolving our skills to be able, for the teen market becomes the adult market?
Oh, on that, I just want to touch on something, which is that we can't forget that even today, something like 8% of people can't use a smartphone. They don't know how to, they're not able to, right? So there still has to be that human element, irrespective. But ultimately, and as you've quite rightly pointed out, the teens who are growing up today, they've always had a phone, they've always had technology, they've never had to think about it, right? But don't forget, technology will continue to move on. By the time they're our age, it might be neural brain interfaces are all the rage, and they're going, what is this neural brain interface thing? And our day, we had to use our fingertips, right? So technology will continue to evolve, we'll continue to have these problems. But my view is get people to do what people are good at, and get computers to do what computers are good at. Computers are great at processing massive amounts of data, doing things very quickly, and finding those correlations that are important, and automating processes. Get humans to do the human things which require the intuitive leaps, that require the warm comfort, require that little bit of advice, a little bit of personal experience that makes these journeys a little bit easier. And that's what you're going to start to find. And there's a great example of open banking going in this direction is OneBanks. We all know that open banking is there. We all know that digital APIs are available, but we also know that banks are busy trying to shut down their bank branches because it costs about 600 grand a year to run one. They don't want to. Whereas OneBank has said, but there's a lot of people out there that need these services. So what they're doing is outsourcing that experience of going into a bank and allowing other banks to subscribe to that via open banking APIs. So you still get the experience of going to your bank, of speaking to a human, but you're actually leveraging digital technology to enable that. And you're going to see more of these hybrid models as we go forwards.
Actually, and we did a webinar with Duncan Coburn from OneBanks before they launched. So you'll find that on the LIBF site. Shafin, you had a hand up, I think, as well. I'm trying to find you on my many tiles now. Is that correct? Is there still a question from Shafin? Let me just see. No? Question gone? Okay. We have some agreement on us over the bot and my anchor on the bot. Humans and computers. And you're right, technology will evolve. Obviously, the teams will have different technology than we have now. And that for me is further than 5 years away. So if we're all looking in our near view mirror, as I call it, for our careers, maybe everything will stay relatively the same as we are now. We'll just move at a different pace. Before we have 2 minutes left, I would like to just ask everyone to think, what is one thing I can do now? So should I have a digital detox type thing on my CV? Should I have a look at my, a skills cull and have a look at where I am, what I'm doing? And from a resource point of view, I know we're all in different places. Is there, a generic, obviously LIBF will have some resources, as you have some resources. Should I go look at something to see what skills, what careers are available? Is it LinkedIn? Is it, how do I get a handle on what I don't know about, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm happy to lead on that one. I have three.
Okay.
Three just absolute go-tos. One is w3schools.com, which is an incredible free resource for digital skill sets, particularly all web development skill sets you can find. They've got tutorials, they've got examples, they've got absolutely everything. It's an amazing resource. Second one is Stack Overflow. If you come up with any questions, that is the place to go. And finally, GitHub, right? And the reason why I talk about GitHub is that the biggest challenge a lot of people have when they do these courses or they go and learn is that they don't have anywhere to apply the skill set to. We all know you need a real problem before you can really start to solve it, right? So GitHub is full of open source projects around every single technology stack and problem you can imagine. Find one that interests you, find a technology that is aligned with what you're trying to learn, and look for a problem, look for one of the open issues. It might even just be, we need some help with documentation, and just submit a pull request, submit a change. And that will get you on that journey of learning, asking questions, and actually making change.
Thank you very much. Anyone want to add?
Oh yeah, if I can build, so if Ez is giving you where you go to build the skills, I'll give it from an employer, large employer's perspective on why you build the skills. So we've got roughly 100 job families across Lloyds. Every single one of those will be impacted by technology, either at one end of the spectrum, just around basic literacy or fluency in technology, or to the other extreme about much more deeply technical skills. But to some degree, you will need technical skills across all of the roles in finance and Lloyds. The second point is, if I look at where we are definitely growing, software engineering, we are going to need hundreds. And I don't think as a big bank saying this from a Lloyds perspective, it would be any different if it was HSBC or Barclays. So if you're looking for a good place to go, then software engineering, because we're going to need hundreds in the years to come. And you're already seeing organizations shifting their workforce from being 90% customer facing to actually all of a sudden 40, 50% of them are engineers. So huge change for incumbent banks. And last but by no means, once you're on the inside, the only way you can get ahead though is the soft skills. because the engineers who are brilliant are the ones with the growth mindsets, those who are able to show empathy, and particularly in a big organization, those who are able to collaborate with others. So tech will get you in the front door, but soft skills will take you beyond.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And actually, we see that on the fintech courses. We get tech people learning their commercial skills. Nadeem, you dropped into the chat.
We've got a fantastic website which has taken me hours to curate, but it's called My Financial Career. And if you're starting off in this sector, you want to find out more about financial roles within the whole spectrum, do check that out. And Ant, I'm going to show you my notepad. If you can read it here, you might not be able to read my writing. There's three things I wrote it here was growth mindset, empathy. So we share that, and the other one I put down as emotional intelligence. So it's nice to know that we are teaching our students things that you're looking for in the incumbents.
That's right. Whew, that's a relief. And Roisin, would you remind us that we should look at our skill set and see where the skills are transferable, as well as what we can add to them?
Yeah, I guess if I was setting out just now thinking about career change, the 3 areas that we will always want more of from a fintech perspective is data. So people that can kind of, look at data, build insights, share them with the rest of the company. That's always really heavily in demand. Product management, they're hiring like crazy, most tech companies and fintechs and financial services for product management, and software engineers. And like, if you're kind of thinking like, I just want to make sure I've got a job, then like, I'd say you're in pretty good stead if you kind of pick one of those routes and you kind of learn some skills that apply to those. But I do also believe that picking a kind of, not a niche, but an area that you want to hone down on, and then just looking at the job specs out there, working back from that. Some of them will have jargon that you don't necessarily understand straight away, but kind of like slowly work your way through it. What does that terminology mean? What does that mean in terms of actual skill I've got to get and what the experience is? And some of it's not quite as daunting as it might first appear, is my main advice and takeaway. Because we have had that quite often in interviews. People say, oh, I didn't really understand that. And you realize they actually do have the relevant experience. So don't discount yourself. Please try and kind of unpick some of this stuff would be what I'd say.
That's a good point. Actually, I think confidence as well, and not making the assumption that you don't have some skill or you don't have the ability to learn, and then putting yourself in with that on the back foot before you even start. I know we've gone over time, and thank you to Doug and to Keith and to Gerald and to everyone, to hear everyone who's been in the chat with us as well. I know you guys have been answering questions. As always on these webinars, we could use more time, which is why we roll over onto the podcast for some things. But I'm sure everyone will. Is it all right if people get in touch? I always ask that question as well, as long as you don't stalk on LinkedIn. And we'll see some of you on some of our training courses as well. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you to the panel as well.